She thought she was going to a charity event. She wore her best dress. She fixed her hair in the mirror of a bathroom she shared with 3 other people. She smiled at herself because she needed to believe, even for one night, that things were going to get better. She had no idea that by the end of that night, a gavel would strike a wooden block in a room full of strangers, and a man in a dark suit would own her. This is not a fairy tale. This is not fiction. This is a story about what desperation does to good people, what power does to corrupt ones, and what truth can do when it finally refuses to stay buried. Stay with me. Because this story is going to shake something inside of you that you may not be ready for. Before we go any further, we want to know, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop your city and country in the comments right now. We genuinely love hearing from all of you. And if you're new here, click that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. Now let's get into it. Her name was Claire Whitfield. 26 years old. Originally from a quiet suburb of Columbus, Ohio, the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew everyone, where kids rode bikes until the streetlights came on, where people left their doors unlocked because they still believed the world was mostly safe. Claire grew up in that world. She grew up believing it. And then, piece by piece, that world fell apart. Her father, Raymond Whitfield, had worked 22 years as a machine operator at a steel fabrication plant on the east side of Columbus. He was a quiet man. Broad-shouldered and soft-spoken, the kind of man who fixed things around the house on Saturday mornings with the radio playing oldies, who made pancakes on Sunday and called them the best in Ohio. Claire worshipped him. She used to sit on the kitchen counter as a little girl and watch him cook, swinging her legs, talking about nothing, about everything. Those mornings were her whole world. Raymond was diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's disease when Claire was 17. It started with a tremor in his right hand, small, almost invisible. He hid it for months. He was too proud to say anything. By the time the doctors confirmed what it was, the disease had already begun its slow, merciless march through his body. He was forced to leave his job 14 months after the diagnosis. And just like that, the foundation of their household crumbled. Claire's mother, Diane, picked up extra shifts at the grocery store where she had worked part-time for years. But grocery store wages don't cover the kind of medical bills that come with neurological disease. They don't cover the specialist visits, the medication adjustments, the in-home care that Raymond eventually required. They don't cover the silence that settles into a house when a family is drowning. Claire had been accepted to the Columbus College of Art and Design. She had a partial scholarship. She had a portfolio her professors said was genuinely remarkable. She deferred her enrollment once. Then again. Then she stopped thinking about it altogether, because thinking about it hurt too much. She took a job as a receptionist at a dental office. She took a second job on weekends waitressing at a diner on Broad Street. She gave almost everything she earned to her parents. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself that every single morning while she was getting dressed in the dark so she wouldn't wake her mother. Think about that for a moment. A 23-year-old young woman, giving up her dream, her education, her freedom, quietly, without complaint, without bitterness, because that is what love looks like when the world stops cooperating. How many of you watching right now have done something similar? How many of you have swallowed a dream because someone you love needed you more? If you have, then you already understand Claire Whitfield better than I can explain her to you. 3 years passed. Her father's condition worsened. He lost the ability to walk unassisted. His speech became slower, more labored. Some days he didn't recognize her. Those were the days that undid her. She would sit in her car in the parking lot of the dental office, gripping the steering wheel, crying quietly, then wiping her face, reapplying her lip gloss, and going inside to smile at patients and ask them about their day. Because that was what Claire did. She kept going. It was in the 4th year of this, the grinding, exhausting, invisible weight of caregiving and debt and deferred living, that Claire met a woman named Sandra Ives. Sandra approached her at the diner one Sunday afternoon. She was well-dressed, mid-40s, warm smile, expensive perfume that Claire would later remember smelled like something clean and optimistic. Sandra said she worked in event coordination for a nonprofit that raised money for medical research. She said they were hosting an exclusive fundraising gala in a few weeks and needed elegant, personable young women to serve as hospitality staff and ambassadors for the event. The pay was $400 for one evening's work. There would be wealthy donors, high-profile guests, a 5-star venue. All Claire had to do was look polished, be gracious, and represent the organization. $400. That was almost 2 full shifts at the diner. Claire needed that money. She needed it for the medication copay that was coming up. She needed it for the electric bill. So she said yes. She asked Sandra for the name of the nonprofit. Sandra handed her a business card. The card said Beacon Hills Charitable Alliance. It had a logo, an address, a website. Claire looked it up that night. The website looked real. Professional. It mentioned past galas, donor spotlights, community initiatives. Nothing felt wrong. Nothing felt off. That is the thing about the people who construct these traps. They are meticulous. They are patient. They understand that trust is built in layers, and they build every single one. 2 weeks later, Claire took a Greyhound bus to Beacon Hills, Pennsylvania, a small but affluent city about 3 hours from Columbus, a city known for its beautiful old architecture, its private investment firms, and its legendary mayor. She checked into the modest hotel room she had been booked and told herself that tomorrow night would change things. Just a little. Just enough. She was wrong about the change. She was right about that it would change things. Before we go further into what happened that night, we want to ask you something. If someone offered you good money to attend a formal event and you were struggling financially, would you go? Be honest in the comments. Would you have done what Claire did? Because the truth is, most of us would. And that truth matters here. Now, we need to talk about the man at the center of this story. Because understanding what happened to Claire is impossible without understanding him. His name was Marcus Hale. Mayor Marcus Hale of Beacon Hills. 51 years old at the time of this story. And if you had met him at a dinner party, you would have liked him immediately. That was his gift. He had the kind of presence that made you feel important, the steady eye contact, the remembered name, the practiced laugh. He had been elected mayor of Beacon Hills 4 years earlier by the largest margin in the city's history. The campaign ads showed him visiting schools, shaking hands at the steel mill that still operated on the south side of town, standing at the podium of the city council with conviction in his jaw. The people of Beacon Hills believed in Marcus Hale. He had, after all, grown up poor on the south side himself. He had put himself through college on scholarships and sheer stubbornness. He had built a real estate development empire before his 40th birthday. He was the American story. Self-made. Disciplined. Righteous. But power is a slow poison when taken in large enough doses, and Marcus Hale had been drinking deeply for years. What the residents of Beacon Hills did not know, what the campaign ads never showed, was the private world that existed behind the polished surface of their mayor. For years, a small, tightly controlled group of wealthy men in Beacon Hills and the surrounding region had been operating what investigators would later describe as an elite exploitation network. These were not men you would recognize from crime documentaries. They were attorneys, property developers, a former state senator, a hospital administrator, men of stature, men of reputation, men who had learned that in the right circles, with the right silence, money could acquire almost anything, including people. Marcus Hale had not created this network. That is an important detail. He had been recruited into it. The man who recruited him, a developer named Glenn Archer, had done so with patience, over years, folding Hale incrementally deeper into a world where the rules were different, where vulnerability was currency, and where the word "no" had been quietly removed from the vocabulary of those who participated. By the time Marcus Hale understood fully what the network was, he was already inside it. And the people inside it knew things about him that he could not afford to have known. That is how traps work on powerful men, too. That is something most people do not understand. The powerful are not always willing participants. Sometimes they are leveraged. Sometimes the line between perpetrator and victim is blurred in ways that the justice system struggles to process. This does not excuse Marcus Hale. What he allowed to happen, what he did not stop, was a crime. But it is important to understand the full picture. Because this story is not just about evil. It is about the architecture of silence that protects it. The gala that Claire had been invited to was, on its surface, exactly what it had been described to her as, a fundraising event, beautifully staged, attended by men in tuxedos and women in gowns. When she arrived at the venue, a renovated historic estate on the edge of the city, chandeliers blazing, a string quartet playing in the foyer, she felt, for the first time in years, like she had stepped into a different life. She stood straighter. She smiled more easily. She thought, maybe this is a door opening. Maybe after tonight, something will be different. She checked in with an event coordinator, a composed woman who handed her a name badge and told her which rooms to circulate through, which guests to greet, and reminded her that the drinks would be served at 8. Claire did her job. She was good at it. She was warm and genuine, and people responded to her because her warmth was not performance, it was just who she was. At 9:30, the event coordinator found her again and told her she was needed in the east wing of the estate. There was a smaller, more exclusive gathering, the coordinator explained. Some of the major donors preferred a more intimate setting. Claire followed her down a corridor she had not been in before, through a set of double doors, and into a room that was arranged very differently from the rest of the event. There was a raised platform at the front of the room. Velvet ropes. Numbered paddles on the seats of 20 or so chairs occupied by men whose faces Claire did not recognize. The music was different here, lower, more oppressive. And the moment the doors closed behind her, the event coordinator stepped aside, and Claire understood, with a cold, dropping certainty that settled into her stomach like a stone, that she was not there to serve drinks. She turned to leave. A man she had not seen stepped into the doorway. He was large. He was not aggressive. He simply stood there and said, quietly, "Please don't do that." And something in the way he said it, the absolute calm, the absolute certainty that she would comply, was more frightening than any raised voice could have been. She stood on that platform and she did not scream. She wants people to understand that. She has said it in the years since, when she has spoken about that night. She did not scream because she was not certain, in that moment, that screaming would help her. She was alone in a building full of strangers. She did not know who was safe. She did not know who would come if she called out. So she stood there. She stood there and she looked at the men in the chairs and she thought of her father, trembling in his bed back in Columbus, and she thought, I have to get out of here alive. Whatever it takes. I have to get out. The bidding started at $500,000. Within 3 minutes, it had climbed to $3 million. And then a voice from the back of the room, calm, deliberate, carrying the particular authority of a man who is accustomed to being listened to, said, $5 million. Silence. The auctioneer, a man in a gray suit with the composure of someone who had done this many times before, looked toward the back of the room and said, $5 million, to the mayor. Mayor Marcus Hale was leaning against the far wall with his arms crossed, not sitting with the other bidders, as if even in this room he wanted to maintain some separation between himself and what was happening. He was looking at Claire. Not with hunger. Not with the expression she had braced herself for. He was looking at her with something else, something that, years later, she would describe as recognition. As if he had seen her before. As if something about her face had stopped him cold. She did not know why. She would not know for months. Now we need you to take a breath with us. What we are about to tell you about what happened next, this is where the story turns. This is where everything you think you understand about Marcus Hale shifts. But before we get there, we want to ask you, if you were Claire, standing on that platform, what would you be feeling? What would you be thinking? Let us know in the comments, because this is important. This is a story about a real dimension of human experience, about the moment when the floor drops out, and we want to know if you can feel it. Claire was taken to the Hale estate that night. It was a large, tasteful property on the northern edge of Beacon Hills, behind iron gates, surrounded by old oak trees. She was brought to a room, not a cell, not a locked space, but a room that was furnished beautifully. Warm lighting. A thick rug. A window that looked out over a garden. There was a bookshelf along one wall. And on the desk, a fresh set of art supplies. Pencils, pastels, sketchbooks. High-quality ones. She stood in the middle of that room for a long time, trying to understand what was happening to her. Marcus Hale knocked on the door that first night. He did not enter without her permission. He knocked, and when she said nothing, he spoke through the closed door. He said, "You are safe here. I know you have no reason to believe that. I am not going to ask you to believe it tonight. But nothing will happen to you in this house." Then he was quiet for a moment, and he added, "I know your name isn't on the registry they used. I know you were brought there under false pretenses. I also know who your mother is." Claire opened the door. She looked at him. He looked at her. And he said something that would not make sense to her for another 3 months. "Your mother's name was Diane Whitfield before she was married. Before that, her name was Diane Calloway. And before she was Diane Calloway, when she was 19 years old in Pittsburgh, she was known to one person as the most important person in the world." Claire said, "What are you talking about?" And Marcus Hale said, "I think you should sit down." The story he told her that night was not the story she expected. He told her that 27 years earlier, he had been a 24-year-old kid from the south side of Beacon Hills with ambition he couldn't yet afford. He had taken a job as a courier, moving between Pittsburgh and Beacon Hills, and on one of those trips he had met a young woman named Diane Calloway at a bus station coffee counter. She had been kind to him in a moment when kindness felt rare. They had talked for 3 hours. They had exchanged numbers on paper torn from a notebook. They had spent 4 months in each other's lives, 4 months of long phone calls and 2 visits, and the particular, fragile intensity of young people who recognize something real in each other. And then his life had pulled him in one direction and hers in another, and they had lost each other the way people lose each other before the internet made finding people simple. He had never forgotten her. He had looked for her, twice, half-heartedly, and failed. He had eventually stopped looking. He had built his life. He had not married. He had, he said, always felt the absence of that period as something permanent. 6 months before this night, while conducting a background review on one of the network's targets, the criminal network he had been folded into, the one that was now controlling him as much as he was controlling anything, he had seen a file. In it was a name. A woman's name. Connected to a young woman being watched by the network as a potential acquisition. The young woman's name was Claire Whitfield. Her mother's maiden name was Diane Calloway. Marcus had done the calculation. He had gone very still at his desk when he did it. He had counted the months. He had thought about the timeline. And then he had gone to find every piece of documentation he could, quietly, so that no one in the network would notice what he was searching for. And what he found had broken something open in him that he had spent decades keeping closed. Because the timeline meant that it was possible, more than possible, that Claire Whitfield was his daughter. Claire sat in the chair across from him in that room and she said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "You're lying." She said it without venom. She said it the way people say something when they want it to be a lie so badly that they have to speak the desire aloud. Because if he was telling the truth, if he was her father, then the story of her entire life had a different shape than the one she had believed. And that was too large a thing to hold immediately. Marcus Hale said, "I had a DNA test prepared. You don't have to trust my word." He set a sealed envelope on the desk. "You don't owe me anything. You don't owe me belief or forgiveness or even conversation. But I need you to understand why I was in that room tonight, and what I intend to do." What he intended to do, he explained, was dismantle the network from within. He had been gathering documentation for months. Financial records, communications, the identities of the men in the chairs. He had been building a case that he intended to deliver to the FBI field office in Philadelphia, an office he had quietly confirmed was not compromised by the network's reach. He had purchased Claire that night because he had seen her name on the acquisition list and understood that if he did not, someone else would, and he would not be able to protect her. He had not had another choice that he could execute in time. He said, "I know how this looks. I know what I participated in, and I will answer for it. But I need you to be safe first." Claire looked at him for a long time. Then she said, quietly, "I want to call my mother." He handed her the phone. The next 72 hours were the longest of Claire Whitfield's life. She spoke to her mother. That conversation, Diane's voice breaking in ways Claire had never heard before, the long silence when Claire described what Marcus Hale had said, and then Diane saying softly, "Oh God," that conversation confirmed more than any DNA test needed to. Diane did not deny knowing Marcus Hale. She had never told Claire about him. She had never told anyone. She had discovered she was pregnant after they lost contact. By the time she might have found him, she was already with Raymond Whitfield, who was kind and steady and who loved her child as his own from the very first day. She had made the choice that seemed right at the time. She had made it out of protection and practicality and something close to grief. And she had carried it for 26 years. The DNA test, when Claire finally opened the envelope, confirmed what both she and her mother already knew. Marcus Hale was her father. Think about that. Think about what that moment must have felt like, standing in a stranger's house, in a city you had never been to before this week, holding a piece of paper that rewrites the story you have told yourself about who you are and where you come from. Think about the specific, disorienting grief of learning that your life had a missing piece you didn't know was missing. How would you feel? How would you even begin to process something like that? We want you to sit with that for a moment. Over the following weeks, while Claire stayed at the estate under what Marcus called a protective arrangement, she watched him work. He was methodical. He was calm in a way she did not yet trust, but came to respect. He made calls. He transferred files. He drove twice to Philadelphia without telling anyone in Beacon Hills where he was going. He was building the case piece by piece, and he was doing it knowing that if the network discovered what he was doing before it was complete, the consequences would be severe. These were not men who responded to betrayal with proportionality. Claire helped him. She had not expected to. But she was sharp and organized, and her years of managing medical paperwork and insurance disputes had given her a working understanding of documentation, of what matters, of how to create a clear record. She sat at the desk in the study and organized the financial records into a chronology. She cross-referenced names against public business filings she accessed online. She found a discrepancy in a real estate transaction record that Marcus had missed, a wire transfer routed through a shell company in Delaware that connected two of the network's members to the estate where the auction had taken place. That discrepancy became one of the central pieces of evidence in the federal indictment. She was doing this for herself. She wants that to be clear. She was not doing it out of love for Marcus Hale. Love was a much longer and more complicated road that she was not yet on. She was doing it because those men in those chairs had looked at her as if she were merchandise, and she needed to answer that. She needed to answer it in a way that would matter. 8 weeks after the night of the auction, Marcus Hale walked into the FBI field office in Philadelphia with 37 gigabytes of documented evidence, his own written confession, and the name of every man who had participated in the network over the preceding 6 years. He turned himself in along with them. The arrests came within 48 hours. 17 men. Attorneys. Developers. A former state senator. A hospital administrator. All of them charged with federal human trafficking offenses, conspiracy, and racketeering. The story broke nationally within the week. It was everywhere, every major outlet, every news feed. Beacon Hills, Pennsylvania, a city known for its beautiful old buildings and its revered mayor, found itself at the center of a story no one had wanted to believe was possible in a place like that. Marcus Hale resigned the mayorship on the same day the story broke. He did not fight the charges against him. He pled guilty to conspiracy and to his participation in the network, and accepted a reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation that the FBI acknowledged had been essential to the successful prosecution of the 17 other defendants. He served 26 months in a federal correctional facility. He did not appeal. He did not complain. He did the time quietly, the way a man does time when he knows it is earned. Glenn Archer, the developer who had recruited Hale into the network a decade earlier, received the longest sentence. 14 years. Claire Whitfield went home to Columbus 2 months after the night of the auction. She walked back into the house she had grown up in and sat on the edge of her father's bed, Raymond Whitfield's bed, and held his hand while he slept. He was weaker than when she had left. The disease had taken more ground in her absence. But he was there. He was warm. He was her father. That had not changed. No piece of paper in the world was going to change that. She has said, in the years since, that she holds 2 truths simultaneously without needing them to resolve into one. Raymond Whitfield raised her. He chose her every single day of her life without knowing that she was not biologically his, and then he found out, because Diane told him the whole truth after everything came to light, and he still chose her. He held her hand a little tighter after he found out, she says. He called her his girl with a little more deliberateness. That is what a father is. That is what love chooses to be when it has the option to choose. The other truth is that Marcus Hale did something, in that room on that platform, that saved her life. It was not heroism. He was not a hero. He had participated in a system that destroyed lives, and he had allowed it to go on far longer than it should have before he found the courage to act. But in the specific moment when it mattered most to Claire, he acted. And she has made her peace with holding both of those things about him without having to decide which one defines him completely. They speak. Not often. Not easily. But they speak. On her birthday last year, he sent her a card. Just a card, nothing more. Inside, he had written only, "I'm proud of who you turned out to be. That's all yours." She kept it. She is not sure what that says about her. She has decided it doesn't need to say anything. 14 months after the night of the auction, Claire Whitfield enrolled at the Columbus College of Art and Design, 5 years late, on a new scholarship offered by a foundation that supports survivors of trafficking. Her admissions essay was 3 pages long. The last line of it read, "I am not what was done to me. I am what I refuse to let it make me." Her professors say her work is remarkable. Her portfolio, they say, is unlike anything they have seen from a student in years. Her first major gallery exhibition is scheduled for this coming fall. The show is titled "Not for Sale." She will be there. She will be standing in front of her own work, in her own name, in a room where no one holds a paddle and no one places a number on her worth. And somewhere in Columbus, Ohio, on a quiet Saturday morning, Raymond Whitfield, slower now, more fragile, but still here, will be listening to oldies on the radio. And that, if you need it, is where the hope lives. If this story reached something in you, if it made you feel something real, Please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling us what part of Claire's story moved you most. Was it her sacrifice for her parents? The moment she discovered the truth? Or the way she chose, in the end, to build rather than collapse? Stories like Claire's exist because silence protects the wrong people. Talking about them, even in a space like this, is how that silence starts to break. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss the stories we bring you. Because every soul has a story. And some of them, like this one, are meant to change the way you see the world. We'll see you in the next one.